Our second scripture for this morning comes from Gospel according to Luke, 24th chapter, the 13th verse to the 31st. On the same day, two men were walking to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem, and talking with each other about all these things that had happened. And while they were talking and discussing, Jesus himself came near and went with them. But their eyes did not recognize him. And he said to them, "What were you discussing with each other while you walked along?" And they stood still, looking sad. Then one of them, whose name was Cleopas, answered him, "Are you the only stranger in Jerusalem who does not know the things that have taken place there in these days?" Jesus asked them, "What things?" And they replied, "The things about Jesus of Nazareth, who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word before God and the people, and how our chief priests and leaders handed him over to be condemned to death and crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel. Yes, and besides all this, it is now the third day since these things took place. Moreover, some of the women in our group astounded us. They were at the tomb this morning, and when they did not find his body there, they came back and told us that they had indeed seen a vision of angels who said he was alive. Some of those who were with us went to the tomb and found it, just as the woman had said, but they did not see him. And then he said to them, "Oh, how foolish you are, and how slow of heart, to believe all that the prophets have declared. Was it not necessary that the Messiah should suffer these things and enter into his glory?" Then beginning with Moses and the prophets, he interpreted to them the things about himself in all the scriptures. And as they came near the village to which they were going, he walked ahead as if he were going on. But they urged him strongly, saying, "Stay with us, because it is almost evening, and the day is nearly over." And so he went in to stay with them, and when he was at table with them, he took bread, blessed it and broke it, and gave it to them. And then their eyes were opened, and they recognized him, and he vanished from their sight. Thanks be to God for this word to us. Back in the 1980s, a wonderful woman named Portia Nelson wrote a little book called "There's a Hole in My Sidewalk." It's one of my favorites. I've used it before. You've probably heard it. Anyway, it goes like this. I walk down the street. There is a deep hole in the sidewalk. I fall in. I am lost. I am helpless. It isn't my fault. It takes forever to find a way out. I walk down the same street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I pretend I don't see it. I fall in again. I can't believe I am in the same place, but it isn't my fault. It takes a long time to get out. I walk down the same street. There is a deep hole in the sidewalk. I see it is there. I still fall in. It's a habit. My eyes are open. I know where I am. It's my fault. I get out immediately. I walk down the same street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I walk around it. I walk down another street. We're all on a journey, aren't we? All of us walking down the road of life. Sometimes it goes well, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes we approach the task with wisdom, and sometimes we're much like the person in Portia's poem, making the same mistakes over and over again, getting caught up in patterns that are nothing less than destructive. Sometimes we see the patterns and move on to something new. Sometimes we see the pattern, but we can't seem to break loose. And sometimes we change direction. We're all on a journey. The question is, where does Easter fit in to this journey? Most people say it fits in perhaps at the end, changing the ending if you had another beginning. No argument there. Some people might say, well, it fits in when you're at the bottom of the hole and need a little help. But really, how does Easter fit into life, into this journey that we're all on? How does Easter fit into our days as we put one foot in front of the other and plod our way down the road? Well, here's the core truth as I see it. Here's the bottom line of Easter. As we travel down the road of life, the sacred is with us. Or to put it another way, as we walk down the road of life, the risen Christ shows up. Think about our first passage for this morning. The women go to the tomb, right? Jesus is not there. Freak out. And then this gardener shows up, and they're talking, and then all of a sudden, surprise. Oh, it's Jesus. He showed up. Then there's the men on the road to Emmaus. These are sad guys. They're wandering away from hope, back into the obscure dust of despair. They're leaving Jerusalem and going back to whatever backwater town they came from. Back to that place, back to that life that they had endured before Christ ever showed up. And then as they walk slowly down that road, what happens? Jesus shows up. And then there's Peter, later in John's Gospel. We didn't get to that one today. But Peter, the denier, right? Peter, the failure, has gone back to Galilee, back to the sea, back to fishing. A defeated man, deeply ashamed, ready to do nothing more than hide. And he's on the edge of the Sea of Galilee, and guess what? Along comes Jesus. There's a pattern here. And it continues over and over again. Later, we have Saul, right? Who would become Paul. Here's a man who loved God but hated the followers of Christ, thought they were heretics, thought he was doing God a favor by killing them off. So here's Saul on the road to Damascus, full of hate, fresh from the killing of Stephen, hot on the trail of more Christians. And then Jesus shows up. It's interesting to me that time after time after time, in the post-resurrection narratives in the Bible, we have people wandering down a road, kind of headed nowhere, and then all of a sudden, the sacred shows up. What I think is this: it doesn't matter what road we're on. It doesn't matter where we're going. We can be going to the garden, to Damascus, to Emmaus, to Capernaum, to Enterprise, to Lost Theme, Portland, God help us, Las Vegas. And the sacred suddenly shows up. And it doesn't matter what our journey is about. We can have lots of agendas on our journey, can't we? The journey, the agenda for the women headed to the garden, their agenda, their focus is grief. They've lost Christ. They are bereft. For the men on the road to Damascus, the agenda, the focus is despair, disappointment, frustration. We had so hoped. Sometimes our agenda in life is bitterness and shame. Think about Peter. Sometimes our agenda might be hate, religious extremism. Think Saul. Wherever we're headed, whatever our journey happens to be about, wherever we're at that moment, what we find is that the sacred shows up. Because we, all of us, each of us, we are the children of God. That's another one of those messages that's in this book we call the Bible. We are the children of God. We are valued. We are treasured. And there is absolutely no way God is going to let us walk down that road alone. Frederick Buechner has a wonderful way of writing about things, and he writes about the road to Emmaus and those two disciples who were on that road. Here's what he says. I believe that although the two disciples did not recognize Jesus on the road to Emmaus, Jesus recognized them. That he saw them as if they were the only two people in the world. And I believe that the reason why the resurrection is more than just an extraordinary event that took place some 2,000 years ago, and then was over and done with, is that as I speak these words and you listen to them, he also sees each of us like that. In this dark world where you and I see so little because of our unrecognizing eyes, he whose eye is on the sparrow sees each one of us as the child in red. And I believe that because he sees us, not even the darkness of death, not even in the darkness of death, are we lost to him or lost to each other. I believe that whether we recognize him or not, or believe in him or not, or even know his name, again and again he comes and walks a little way with us along whatever road we're following. I particularly love that last line. I believe that whether we recognize him or not, believe in him or not, even know his name, again and again he comes and walks a little ways with us along whatever road we're following. Now there's something else to notice here. In each case, they're kind of wandering somewhere. In each case, God comes alongside, and in each case, everybody misses it. At least at first, right? No one sees Jesus for who he is. Which leads me to believe that even though God always sees us, we do not always see God. The women think he's a gardener. The men on the road to Emmaus think he's some random stranger. Peter doesn't have a clue who this guy is until there's this miraculous net full of fish. And Saul, well, he's kind of blinded by the whole thing. There are so many reasons why, perhaps, the people in these stories missed that this was the presence of God. The women were wrapped up in their grief. The men in their disappointment, Peter in his shame, Paul in his religious zeal. Nothing quite as blinding as religious zeal. There were perhaps powerful reasons, in other words. The people did not at first see the sacred presence. And that's why it took a little bit of work. A little bit of initiative, maybe even a little bit of divine creativity for the sacred to get through to these rather preoccupied people. With the women, he finally speaks, and they recognize the voice. And there was recognition. With the sad disciples, it's when he breaks the bread. Did you catch the parallel between the way that episode was worded and the way Paul words the words of the Last Supper? Words that we use every time we celebrate communion. He broke bread when he'd given thanks. So he breaks bread, and that brings back this flood of memories about the upper room and the Last Supper and Jesus. And so all of a sudden, there is an awakening of understanding. With Peter, of course, it's all about fish. Peter, always about fish. We have this miraculous catch, and it's almost as if Jesus were revisiting with Peter the first encounter he had with Peter on the same side, same shore of that same sea as he was out fishing. So we have sacred present, that's a given. And then we have the sacred kind of having to work a little bit to wake us up to this presence. And then we have recognition, right? Oh, wow. The sacred is here. And then we have what? Something else, don't we? Doesn't end there. No one remains the same when they finally recognize the present Christ. The women turn from sorrow to, if not joy, at least wonder. What's going on here? And there's at least a little bit of hope. The men on the road turn to one another and go, whoa, did not our hearts burn within us? And hope is reborn for them. Peter moves from being a shamed failure to being the empowered leader of the church. He can lay down Simon and once again become Petros, or Peter, the rock. And Saul becomes Paul. His transformation, like Peter's, is so radical that even his name has to change. So this is the ongoing gift of Easter. It is God seeking us, God coming alongside us, finding us, seeing us, God getting through to us, waking us up to divine presence, and then God transforming us. It seems so simple, right? Of course, it is simple. It's just not easy. Because, as we've already talked about, we have those agendas, don't we? We have those things that preoccupy us. We have our ideology, we have our jobs, we have our greed, we have our hate, we have our fear, we have our failures. We have good things like our families. We have so many things that preoccupy us and fill our minds to the point that we do not see the sacred when it comes. But the sacred, we know, does not give up. The sacred comes and comes and comes and is present and in love seeks to draw us from all those other things. Draw our attention from those things until our eyes are fixed on the sacred presence. And then through that presence, something happens. We are changed. It can come through many kinds of things, right? It can come through something that happens to us, through something we see, through someone we know, through words that are spoken, through words that are read. I don't ever know when or where the risen one is going to hit me across the head with a 2x4. But it happened. And when I finally see it, when we finally see, when our eyes are finally open, life changes. This is an Easter, I think, which for many people seems kind of dark. I'm not talking about the weather. Hateful rhetoric abounds in our country. Terrorists do despicable and horrible things. People, in response to what the terrorists have done, think and say horrible and despicable things. Oppression is far too common. Justice is far too rare. There's fear everywhere. But Easter means that in the midst of all of that, as preoccupying as all of that is, as all engrossing as all of that is, we are not powerless. We are not left at the mercy of the dark. We have a risen Christ, a sacred presence that lifts us up and transforms us. So let us walk down the road. Let us walk down the road, not with our minds full of defeat, not with our minds full of despair or grief, not with our eyes fixed on the ground. Let us walk down the road with our hearts open to sacred presence, knowing that God will seek us out and will see us, and that we will not be alone. Let us walk down the road in the good company of the risen Christ. Let us pray. Mighty God, we thank you for your word. We thank you for this day when we celebrate the reality of your living presence through the Spirit which is in each one of us. As we walk through life, we are indeed never alone. We bear the sacred. We bear the burden of the mystery. But it is not a burden alone. It is a gift. And it is a gift which transforms everything. Help us, Lord, to be aware of that presence, awake to that presence. Help us to give you room to work, that our lives, too, as the lives of these people and these stories that we heard today, that our lives, too, might be transformed. This we pray in the name of Christ. Amen. If you will stand and turn to 165 in the red hymnal.